Picture this. It's 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The sun is just beginning to peek through the curtains of a quiet suburban home. Inside, 68-year-old Margaret sits alone at her kitchen table, staring at her coffee cup, wondering where the years have gone. Time flies faster as you get older, she whispers to herself. But deep down, she knows that's not the whole truth. Something else is happening here. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that will change everything you think you know about aging, about time, and about what it truly means to live fully in your golden years. This isn't just any story. This is a 2,500-year-old wisdom that has been waiting for you. A wisdom that reveals the secret to transforming your retirement years from empty days into the most meaningful chapter of your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why some people seem to glow with vitality at 80, while others appear to have given up on life at 60. The difference? It's not luck, it's not genetics, and it's certainly not about having more money. The difference lies in understanding one ancient principle that the Buddha called heedfulness. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to apply it to your life.
Let me introduce you to three people whose lives were about to change forever. First, there's Margaret. At 68, she had recently lost her husband of 45 years. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation now stood silent. Her children had moved across the country, and her grandchildren visited only on holidays. Margaret's days had become a blur of sameness. She would wake up, make coffee, watch morning television, eat lunch alone, take a nap, watch more television, eat dinner alone, and go to bed. Rinse and repeat. I have all this time now, she would tell herself, but I don't know what to do with it. The days stretched before her like an endless desert, each one identical to the last. Then there's Robert, 72, a retired engineer who had spent his entire career designing bridges and buildings. When he retired, he thought he would finally have time to pursue his hobbies. But somehow, the hobbies never materialized. I will start woodworking tomorrow, he would say. I will learn to play the guitar next week. But tomorrow became next week became next month, and before he knew it, a year had passed with nothing to show for it. Robert found himself spending hours scrolling through social media, watching YouTube videos about projects he would never start, and feeling increasingly frustrated with himself. Finally, there's Eleanor, 65, who had spent her entire adult life caring for others. First her children, then her aging parents, then her grandchildren. When her last grandchild started school, Eleanor found herself with something she had never experienced before: time for herself. But instead of joy, this newfound freedom brought anxiety. What am I supposed to do now? She would ask herself. Who am I when I'm not taking care of someone else? These three people represent millions of seniors who find themselves in what I call the empty years, that period after retirement when the structure of work disappears, and without intentional action, life can become a series of empty days. But here's where our story takes a dramatic turn.
One day, Margaret received a package in the mail. It was from her daughter, who had been worried about her mother's isolation. Inside was a book about ancient wisdom traditions, and a note that read, "Mom, I think this might help you find your way." Margaret was skeptical. What could some old book teach me about my life, she thought. But with nothing else to do, she opened it and began reading about something called the Dhammapada. As she read, one particular chapter caught her attention. Chapter 2, titled Heedfulness, or Diligence. The first verse stopped her cold. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The heedful do not die. The heedless are as if already dead. Margaret put the book down and stared out the window. As if already dead, she repeated to herself. Was that what she had become? Was she already dead while still breathing? The next verse hit her even harder. Having clearly understood this, the wise rejoice in heedfulness and delight in the realm of the noble ones. Margaret realized that she had been living in heedlessness, not laziness, but a kind of mental and spiritual sleepwalking through her days. She had been physically alive, but spiritually dormant. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what it meant to be heedful, to be fully present, fully engaged, fully alive in each moment. The next morning, she made a decision that would change everything. Margaret decided to start small. She had always loved books, so she walked to her local library and asked if they needed volunteers. The librarian's eyes lit up. "We've been hoping someone would ask," she said. "We have a children's reading program that needs help, and we also need someone to organize our senior section." That first day, Margaret spent 3 hours at the library. She helped a 7-year-old boy find books about dinosaurs. She organized the mystery section, and she chatted with other volunteers. When she got home that evening, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Tired, but in a good way. Tired from doing something meaningful. The next day, she went back, and the day after that. Within a week, Margaret had established a routine that gave her days structure and purpose. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Margaret wasn't just filling time. She was experiencing what the Dhammapada called rejoicing in heedfulness. She was discovering that being fully present and engaged wasn't work, it was joy. Meanwhile, Robert was having his own awakening. He had been browsing YouTube when he stumbled upon a video about ancient wisdom in aging. The speaker mentioned something that caught his attention. The wise person makes an island that no flood can overwhelm. Robert paused the video. What did that mean? He rewound and listened again. Through effort, heedfulness, restraint and self-control, the wise person makes an island that no flood can overwhelm. Suddenly, Robert understood. He had been waiting for motivation to strike him, but the ancient wisdom was saying something different. Start with effort. Start with small actions, and the motivation would follow. That afternoon, Robert went to the hardware store and bought a basic set of woodworking tools. He didn't know what he was going to make, but he knew he needed to start. His first project was a disaster, a lopsided birdhouse that looked more like modern art than a functional home for birds. But Robert didn't care. For the first time in months, he had spent 3 hours completely focused on something, completely present in the moment. The next day, he went back, and the day after that.
Within a week, Robert had created a small workshop in his garage and was teaching his neighbor's grandchildren how to make simple wooden toys. Eleanor's transformation came through a different path. She had always been interested in cooking, but had never had time to explore it fully. One day, she decided to challenge herself to cook one new recipe every week. The first week, she made homemade pasta. It was a disaster. The dough was too sticky, the noodles were too thick, and the whole process took 4 hours. But Eleanor laughed at her mistakes and tried again the next day. By the end of the month, Eleanor was hosting weekly cooking classes for other seniors in her community center. She discovered that teaching others brought her more joy than she had experienced in years.
As these 3 people began to transform their lives, they started to understand the deeper meaning of the ancient wisdom they had discovered. Margaret realized that the Dhammapada wasn't just talking about staying busy. It was talking about staying alive. The difference between heedfulness and heedlessness wasn't about activity level. It was about presence. When she was helping children at the library, Margaret wasn't just organizing books. She was fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. She was experiencing what the ancient text called the deathless, not immortality, but a quality of being that transcends the limitations of age. Robert discovered that heedfulness wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. The Dhammapada spoke of the wise advance like a racehorse, leaving the others behind. But Robert realized this wasn't about speed, it was about consistency. While others were still waiting for the perfect moment to start, Robert was already on his 2nd birdhouse, his 3rd, his 4th. He was moving forward while others remained stuck. Eleanor found that heedfulness was about connection. The ancient wisdom spoke of creating an island that no flood can overwhelm. And Eleanor realized that her island wasn't built of wood or stone. It was built of relationships, of shared experiences, of mutual support. Through her cooking classes, Eleanor wasn't just teaching recipes. She was creating a community, a safe haven where people could come together, learn, laugh, and support each other. As Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor continued their journeys, something remarkable began to happen. Their transformation started to affect everyone around them. Margaret's library program became so popular that the library had to expand its hours. Parents started bringing their children specifically to work with Miss Margaret, as the kids called her. Other seniors began volunteering, inspired by Margaret's example. Robert's woodworking classes grew from 2 children to a dozen. Parents started asking if he could teach adult classes too. Robert found himself mentoring other retirees who wanted to learn new skills. Eleanor's cooking classes became a community institution. People weren't just learning to cook, they were forming friendships, sharing stories, and supporting each other through life's challenges. But here's the most remarkable part. Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor weren't just helping others, they were experiencing what the Dhammapada called rejoicing in heedfulness. They were discovering that true joy comes not from receiving, but from giving. Not from being served, but from serving. The ancient wisdom was proving itself true. The heedful among the heedless, the wide awake among the sleepy, the wise advance like a racehorse, leaving the others behind. But every transformation story has its crisis, and this one was no different. 6 months into her new routine, Margaret received devastating news. Her daughter had been diagnosed with cancer. Suddenly, everything seemed meaningless again. What was the point of organizing books when her daughter was fighting for her life? Margaret stopped going to the library. She stopped calling friends. She retreated into the same isolation she had experienced before. But then something happened that changed everything. One afternoon, there was a knock on Margaret's door. It was Sarah, a 9-year-old girl who had been in Margaret's reading program. "Ms. Margaret," Sarah said, "I've been waiting for you at the library. Are you okay?" Margaret looked at this child who had come to check on her, and she realized something profound. Her heedfulness wasn't just about her own fulfillment. It was about being there for others, even in the midst of her own pain. The next day, Margaret returned to the library. She wasn't there for herself. She was there for Sarah and for all the other children who depended on her. In serving others, she found the strength to face her own challenges. Robert faced a different kind of crisis. After months of successful woodworking, he developed arthritis in his hands. The doctor told him he might need to give up his new hobby. At first, Robert was devastated. He had finally found something that gave his life meaning, and now it was being taken away from him. But then he remembered something from the ancient wisdom. The wise person makes an island that no flood can overwhelm. His island wasn't built on perfect health or perfect circumstances. It was built on his commitment to heedfulness itself. Robert adapted. He learned to use different tools, different techniques. He focused on teaching rather than doing. He discovered that his greatest joy came not from creating perfect objects, but from helping others discover their own creativity. Eleanor's crisis came when her community center announced it was closing due to budget cuts. Her cooking classes, which had become the highlight of her week, were about to disappear. But Eleanor had learned something about heedfulness. It wasn't dependent on external circumstances. She didn't need a fancy kitchen or an official program to share her knowledge and connect with others. Eleanor started hosting cooking classes in her own home. She invited neighbors, friends, and anyone who wanted to learn. Her small kitchen became a gathering place, a center of community and connection. As Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor navigated their crises, they began to understand the deepest meaning of the ancient wisdom they had discovered. The Dhammapada wasn't just about staying busy or finding hobbies. It was about cultivating a quality of attention, a way of being present that transforms every moment into something meaningful. Margaret realized that heedfulness wasn't about avoiding pain or difficulty. It was about meeting life's challenges with full presence and awareness. When she returned to the library after her daughter's diagnosis, she wasn't running away from her pain. She was finding a way to transform it into service and connection. Robert discovered that heedfulness wasn't about perfect circumstances. It was about perfect attention. Even with arthritis, he could still be fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. His physical limitations didn't diminish his spiritual vitality. Eleanor found that heedfulness wasn't about having the right resources. It was about having the right attitude. Her small kitchen became more powerful than the community center because it was filled with love, intention, and presence. The ancient wisdom was revealing its deepest truth. Heedfulness is not about what you do, but how you do it. It's not about external circumstances, but internal orientation. It's not about avoiding life's difficulties, but meeting them with full awareness and compassion. 2 years after their transformations began, Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor found themselves in a position they had never imagined. They had become mentors, teachers, and sources of inspiration for others. Margaret's library program had grown into a city-wide initiative. Other libraries were calling her for advice on how to create similar programs. She had written a guidebook for senior volunteers and was speaking at conferences about the importance of intergenerational connection. But more importantly, Margaret had discovered something about herself. She wasn't just a retired widow. She was a teacher, a mentor, a vital part of her community. Her golden years had become the most meaningful chapter of her life. Robert's woodworking classes had expanded into a full-fledged community workshop. He was teaching not just children, but adults of all ages. His garage had become a gathering place where people came not just to learn woodworking, but to connect, share stories, and support each other. Robert had discovered that his greatest gift wasn't his technical skill. It was his ability to create a space where others could discover their own creativity and potential. Eleanor's home cooking classes had inspired a network of similar programs throughout her city. She had become known as Grandma Eleanor to dozens of families who had learned to cook together in her kitchen. But Eleanor's greatest discovery was that heedfulness wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. Her cooking classes weren't about creating perfect meals. They were about creating perfect moments of connection and joy. As Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor reflected on their journeys, they began to understand how the ancient wisdom of the Dhammapada applied to their modern lives. The first verse had been their wake-up call. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. They had learned that the deathless wasn't about living forever. It was about living fully, with complete presence and awareness. The second verse had shown them the way. Having clearly understood this, the wise rejoice in heedfulness and delight in the realm of the noble ones. As Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor reflected on their journeys, they began to understand how the ancient wisdom of the Dhammapada applied to their modern lives. The first verse had been their wake-up call. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. They had learned that the deathless wasn't about living forever. It was about living fully, with complete presence and awareness. The second verse had shown them the way. Having clearly understood this, the wise rejoice in heedfulness and delight in the realm of the noble ones. They had discovered that heedfulness wasn't work. It was joy. It was play. It was the natural state of a fully alive human being. The third verse had given them their method. They meditate constantly. They are always energetic. The wise touch the deathless, the supreme security from bondage. They had learned that meditation wasn't just sitting in silence. It was any activity done with complete attention and presence. The fourth verse had shown them their protection. Through effort, heedfulness, restraint, and self-control, the wise person makes an island that no flood can overwhelm. They had discovered that their island wasn't built of external circumstances. It was built of internal qualities: effort, attention, discipline, and self-control. The fifth verse had revealed the contrast. Foolish people are given to heedlessness. The wise person guards heedfulness as the greatest treasure. They had learned that heedfulness wasn't just a nice thing to have. It was the most precious thing they could cultivate. The 6th verse had shown them their perspective. When the wise person drives out heedlessness with heedlessness, having climbed the palace of wisdom, they looked down upon the sorrowing crowd. They had discovered that heedfulness gave them a perspective that transcended their personal problems and connected them to something larger. The 7th verse had revealed their advantage. The heedful among the heedless, the wide awake among the sleepy, the wise advanced like a racehorse, leaving the others behind. They had learned that heedfulness wasn't about speed, it was about consistency, persistence, and forward movement. The 8th verse had shown them their inspiration. Through heedfulness, Indra became the chief of the gods. Heedfulness is praised, heedlessness is always blamed. They had discovered that heedfulness was universally recognized as a virtue, something to be cultivated and celebrated. The 9th verse had given them their commitment. The monk who delights in heedfulness and looks with fear on heedlessness advances like fire, burning all fetters, great and small. They had learned that heedfulness wasn't just a practice, it was a way of life, a commitment to staying awake and aware in every moment. 5 years after their transformations began, Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor found themselves in a place they had never imagined possible. Margaret, now 73, had become a sought-after speaker on aging and community engagement. She had written a book about her experiences and was mentoring other seniors who wanted to make their golden years meaningful. But more importantly, Margaret had discovered that her golden years weren't about slowing down, they were about deepening. She wasn't just filling time, she was fulfilling purpose. Robert, now 77, had become a master craftsman and teacher. His workshop had become a community institution, and he was training the next generation of woodworkers. But his greatest achievement wasn't the beautiful objects he created, it was the beautiful relationships he nurtured. Robert had discovered that heedfulness wasn't about perfecting objects, it was about perfecting presence. Every moment in his workshop was an opportunity to be fully alive, fully engaged, fully present. Eleanor, now 70, had become a community leader and cultural bridge builder. Her cooking classes had evolved into a multicultural exchange program where people from different backgrounds came together to share food, stories, and traditions. Eleanor had discovered that heedfulness wasn't about following recipes. It was about following intuition, about being present to the moment, about creating something beautiful from whatever ingredients life provided. But here's the most remarkable part of their story. Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor had discovered that heedfulness wasn't something they did, it was something they were. It wasn't a practice they performed, it was a way of being they embodied. They had become living examples of the ancient wisdom, fully present, fully engaged, fully alive, regardless of their age or circumstances. As our story draws to a close, I want to share with you the deepest truth that Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor discovered. Heedfulness isn't about age, it's about attention. It's not about having the right circumstances, it's about having the right orientation. It's not about avoiding life's difficulties, it's about meeting them with full presence and awareness. The ancient wisdom of the Dhammapada wasn't just about spiritual practice, it was about human flourishing. It wasn't just about enlightenment, it was about engagement. It wasn't just about transcending the world, it was about transforming it through the quality of your attention. Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor discovered that their golden years could be the most meaningful chapter of their lives, not despite their age, but because of it. They had the time, the experience, the wisdom, and the perspective to make a real difference in their communities. But more importantly, they discovered that heedfulness wasn't something they had to achieve, it was something they could choose, moment by moment, day by day, year by year. Now, here's where your story begins. You might be thinking, that's a nice story, but I'm not Margaret, Robert, or Eleanor. I don't have their circumstances, their resources, or their opportunities. But here's the truth. Heedfulness isn't about circumstances, resources, or opportunities. It's about choice. It's about deciding right now, in this moment, to be fully present, fully engaged, fully alive. You don't need to volunteer at a library, learn woodworking, or teach cooking classes. You need to find your own way to practice heedfulness, your own way to be fully present and engaged with life. Maybe it's gardening, maybe it's writing, maybe it's music, maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's learning something new, maybe it's mentoring others, maybe it's simply being more present with your family and friends. The specific activity doesn't matter. What matters is the quality of attention you bring to it. What matters is your commitment to being fully alive, fully engaged, fully present in each moment. The ancient wisdom is clear. Heedfulness is the path to the deathless. Not immortality, but a quality of being that transcends the limitations of age, circumstance, and even death itself. Margaret, Robert, and Eleanor discovered that heedfulness wasn't about living forever. It was about living fully, with complete presence and awareness, regardless of how much time they had left. And that's the invitation I'm extending to you today. Not to live forever, but to live fully. Not to avoid aging, but to age with awareness. Not to escape life's difficulties, but to meet them with heedfulness. If this story has touched you, if it has given you hope, if it has inspired you to think differently about your golden years, then I invite you to join our community of seekers and learners. Subscribe to this channel to receive more stories of transformation, more ancient wisdom made modern, more inspiration for living fully at any age. Give this video a thumbs up if it has reminded you that your golden years can be the most meaningful chapter of your life. And most importantly, share your story in the comments below. Tell us, what does heedfulness mean to you? What activities help you feel fully alive and engaged? What challenges have you faced in your golden years, and how have you met them? What wisdom have you gained from your own journey? Your story matters. Your experience matters. Your wisdom matters. By sharing it, you become part of a larger conversation about what it means to age with grace, wisdom, and heedfulness. In our next video, we'll explore Dhammapada Chapter 3, The Mind. We'll discover how the ancient wisdom about the mind can help us navigate the mental and emotional challenges of aging with greater clarity and peace. Until then, remember, heedfulness isn't something you achieve, it's something you choose. It's not about perfect circumstances, it's about perfect attention. It's not about avoiding life's difficulties. It's about meeting them with full presence and awareness. Your golden years are waiting for you. The question is, will you meet them with heedfulness? Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your golden years be filled with meaning, purpose, and joy. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.